There is a version of you that exists in the pauses, not in what you say, not in the role you perform when people are watching. Spy in the moment, just before you adjust, that flicker of something unguarded, before you remember where you are and who you're supposed to be. Most people never examine that moment. They move through it so quickly, it barely registers as real. But it is the most honest thing about you. This video is about that version. You were taught, very early, that certain parts of you were inconvenient. Maybe it was the way you felt things too deeply. The questions you asked that made adults uncomfortable. The sensitivity that someone called weakness before you knew it was a signal. The intensity that didn't fit the room. So you learned to manage the presentation. You learned which version of you got approval, which version got love, which version made things easier for everyone else. And you became very good at that version, so good that somewhere along the way, you started to believe it was you. But adaptation is not identity, and the self that learned to hide is not the self that disappeared. Here is something behavioral science has documented for decades, though it rarely gets framed this way. Every person has a psychological signature, a consistent pattern of perception, reaction, and meaning-making that is entirely their own. It doesn't change across relationships or contexts. It doesn't shift when you change careers or partners or cities. T's operational underneath all of it. The people who seem most alive, not loudest, not most confident, but most alive, are the ones in closest contact with that signature. They have, through some combination of pain and honesty, stopped performing away from themselves. The people who feel most hollow are often the most polished. The performance is intact. The person underneath has been waiting a long time. You have felt this before. There are moments, rare ones, when something cuts through the performance and you feel yourself land. A piece of music that stops you. A stranger who speaks without pretense. A conversation that goes somewhere you didn't plan. A moment of solitude that doesn't feel empty. In those moments, you are not managing anything. You are simply there. And then it passes. You return to the version that functions. The version that knows what to say. But notice what happened. Notice who showed up in that moment. That wasn't an aberration. That was the version of you nobody was supposed to notice. And for a second, they did. The process of hiding yourself is not passive. It is active, ongoing, and metabolically expensive. Psychological research on emotional suppression consistently shows the same pattern. It's the effort of managing your external presentation while experiencing something internally different creates a measurable cognitive load. It taxes working memory. It degrades emotional regulation over time. It makes you feel chronically tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. This is not metaphor. This is the literal cost of performing a self that isn't yours. And the longer the suppression runs, the more automatic it becomes. The gap between what you feel and what you show begins to feel like the natural order, not something constructed, but something fixed. Not something you chose, but something you are. This is the deepest layer of the pattern. Not just hiding from others, beginning to hide from yourself. Here's what makes this particularly precise. The people around you can feel the gap. Not consciously, they may not be able to articulate it, but something in human perception is calibrated for authenticity. We are wired to detect the micro discrepancies between what someone says and what they are actually doing internally. It registers as something slightly off, as distance, as performance. You have felt it in other people. It's that sense that someone is technically saying all the right things, but something underneath is absent. Something is being managed rather than shared. This is what others sometimes feel in you. And it is not because you are dishonest. It is because you have become so practiced at the performance that the performance has started to precede the presence. To find the version of you nobody was supposed to notice, you do not need to excavate the past. You need to pay attention to the present, specifically, to the moments just before you adjust, before you soften what you actually think, to make it easier to hear, before you make yourself smaller in the room to avoid taking up too much space, before you deflect the compliment, qualify the boundary, or redirect the attention. In that moment, before the management, what is there? Is that reaction, that impulse, that unedited first response. It is not always comfortable. It will not always be what you want it to be, but it is yours. It is the psychological signature operating without interference. Begin to notice it. Not to act on it blindly, but to know it is there. It's to stop treating it as something to be corrected. There is a version of identity recovery that people misunderstand. They believe it means becoming louder, more expressive, more demanding of space. They frame it as an emergence, a dramatic unveiling of the suppressed self. That is not what happens. So what actually happens is quieter, and in some ways, more disorienting. Begin to notice that the things you are most certain about yourself, your preferences, your limitations, your personality, were largely constructed from adaptive responses, not genuine data. You did not actually prefer to stay in the background. You learned that the background was safe. You did not actually lack the capacity for depth. You learned that depth made people uncomfortable. You did not actually need very little. You learned to stop asking. When those adaptations are examined honestly, what's left is not a finished self. It is an open question. And that open question is where the actual person lives. What happens when the version nobody was supposed to notice never gets noticed? It does not dissolve. It does not accept its irrelevance and go quiet. It surfaces in the wrong moments, in the disproportionate reactions that you can't explain, in the grief that arrives when nothing has technically gone wrong, in the exhaustion of relationships where you are liked but not known, in the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people and still unreachable. It surfaces in the patterns in choosing situations that reinforce the old adaptation, in finding people who need the performed version more than the real one, in building a life that fits the shape of the wound. The version of you nobody was supposed to notice does not disappear when ignored. It becomes the architecture of everything you build. This is not about dramatic transformation. It's not about who you could become with the right system or the right practice. This is about a simpler, more precise recognition. The version of you nobody was supposed to notice has been present this entire time. In the moments you moved through too quickly, in the reactions you explained away, in the impulses you corrected before they could finish forming, you have been doing the correction so long you stopped hearing the original signal. Begin to hear it. Not because it will make you more successful, or more likable, or easier to love, but because you will finally, perhaps for the first time in a long time, be in the same room as yourself, and that changes everything. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the way that only truth does, quietly, completely, and with no way back.